There are some prayers that a mother says every single night for so many years that they stop feeling like prayers and start feeling like breathing. Just something the body does automatically, without being asked. Something that happens whether you are awake or asleep, whether you are at the kitchen table or in the middle of the grocery store or sitting in church trying to pay attention to the sermon. A quiet, constant, never-stopping conversation with whoever is listening, saying the same thing over and over again. Please bring him home. Please bring my boy home. Deborah Calloway had been saying that prayer for 14 years. If you believe in the kind of love that doesn't quit, the kind that waits and waits and waits without any guarantee that the wait will ever end, hit that like button right now and subscribe. Every week we bring you real stories about real people, and this is one you're going to want to stay for. Now let's get into it. Deborah was 61 years old when she walked onto the set of Family Feud, and she walked in the way that women who have survived a great deal walk, with her back straight and her chin up and a smile that was wide and warm and real. But that had, if you looked closely, a tiredness sitting just behind it. The kind of tiredness that doesn't come from not sleeping enough. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time without being able to put it down. She had come with her sister Renee, her niece Cassandra, her best friend of 30 years Marguerite, and Marguerite's teenage son Damon, who had been drafted into the family team because they needed a fifth person and he was 17 and had no way to say no. The team was full of energy and humor, and exactly the kind of warmth that makes a studio audience lean forward in their seats. Deborah was funny. She was quick. She had a way of answering survey questions with complete confidence that made the audience cheer even when she got them wrong, which made her laugh, which made everyone else laugh, which made the whole room feel a little more like a family gathering than a television taping. Steve Harvey loved her immediately. That was clear from the first few minutes. He has a radar for people who are genuinely good, people who carry real warmth rather than performed warmth, and Deborah Calloway set it off the moment she walked in. He spent more time with her in the opening segment than he usually does with contestants. He asked about her family, her life, what she did for work. She told him she had worked as a school cafeteria manager for 22 years. She told him she had 3 children. She told him her oldest, Marcus, had joined the army when he was 22 years old and had been stationed overseas, mostly in the Middle East, for the better part of 14 years. She said it plainly. The way people say things that are true and painful and simply part of the reality of their lives. She didn't say it to get sympathy. She said it the way you answer a question honestly. Steve paused. He said, 14 years. That's a long time to have your son far from home. Deborah nodded. She said, it is, but he's doing what he loves and he's serving, so I'm proud. I'm always proud. She smiled when she said it, but there was something in the smile, a fullness, an effort that told you the pride and the missing were not separate things. They lived together inside her the way big feelings tend to do. Steve nodded slowly and let it sit. He didn't press. He moved on with the game, but he kept the information close. The Calloway team played well. Deborah was the anchor, the one everyone looked to when they weren't sure, the one who held the energy of the group together. Her sister Renee was competitive in a way that made the audience laugh. Cassandra buzzed in too fast twice and got it wrong both times and took it with complete grace. Marguerite had one spectacular answer that brought the house down and then apologized for being too loud, which brought the house down again. Damon, the drafted 17-year-old, turned out to be surprisingly good and earned a genuine appreciative nod from Steve Harvey, which made him stand up straighter for the rest of the game. They made it to the fast money round. Deborah would be playing. She stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone slightly, and looked out at the audience with an expression that was calm and focused, and a little bit like a woman who had survived 14 years of waiting and was not about to be rattled by a game show. But before the round began, Steve walked over to her and stood beside her the way he does when he's about to do something that is not in the script. He said, Deborah, before we start, I have to ask you something. She looked at him. Her expression didn't change. Patient. Ready, he said, you mentioned Marcus, your son, 14 years overseas. He paused. When was the last time you saw him? Deborah took a breath. Just one. She said, 2 years and 4 months ago. He got leave for his sister's wedding. He was home for 9 days. She paused. 9 days in 2 years. She shook her head slightly, not in bitterness, just in the simple arithmetic of what it had cost. He's supposed to rotate back sometime this year, but I don't have a date. I don't ever have a date until it's basically happening. Steve nodded. He said, so right now, as far as you know, Marcus is overseas. Deborah said, as far as I know, yes. Steve Harvey looked at her for a long moment. And then he said very quietly, what if I told you that wasn't true? The world stopped. Deborah Calloway looked at Steve Harvey and her face did something that faces do when the brain receives information it is not equipped to process quickly. It went completely still. Not blank, still. Like everything in her paused at the same time, waiting for her to catch up to what was happening. She said very slowly, "What do you mean?" Steve said Marcus completed his final overseas rotation 6 weeks ago. He has been stateside for 6 weeks, Deborah, and he has been waiting very patiently, I'm told, for today. The audience made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a cry. Deborah's hand came up to her mouth. Her sister Renee grabbed Cassandra's arm. Marguerite was already crying. Even Damon, the 17-year-old who had been drafted and had no personal stake in this, looked like someone had punched him in the chest in the best possible way. Deborah said from behind her hand, "He's here," Steve said. "He's here." She said, "Marcus is here right now in this building," Steve said. "Right now, in this building, and he asked me to give you a message before we bring him out." Steve looked down at a small card in his hand and read in a voice that was steady but careful, the voice of a man who understood the weight of every word he was carrying. "Mom, I know you've been waiting. I know it's been too long. I know I've missed things I can't get back. But I need you to know every single day that I was away, I knew I was coming home to you. Every single day. And I'm right behind you." There are moments on television that transcend what television is supposed to be. This was one of them. The camera caught Deborah Calloway at the exact instant those words landed. The exact instant that 14 years of prayers and waiting and proud smiles that cost something and 9-day visits and no dates and not knowing met the words "I'm right behind you." And what her face did in that moment was something that no one in that studio and no one watching at home would ever fully forget. It was not just joy. It was not just relief. It was the specific, overwhelming, total release of someone who has been braced for a very long time and has just been told they can stop bracing. Her whole body changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her spine softened. She looked in that instant like someone had gently lifted a weight off her that she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was there. She turned around. Marcus Calloway was 36 years old. He was tall and broad and wearing his dress uniform, the green and gold and brass of a staff sergeant who had given 14 years to something larger than himself. He stood at the back of the stage with his hands at his sides and his jaw tight and his eyes bright with everything he had been holding since he walked into that building and understood what was about to happen. He had waited through the whole game. Watched his mother be funny and sharp and warm and alive behind a fast money podium without being able to touch her. He had stood backstage with producers and crew members who had passed him tissues without saying anything, because sometimes that is the only appropriate thing to do. And he had watched her through a monitor the entire time. Every answer she gave, every laugh. Every moment where she looked just like herself, the woman he had pictured in every difficult place he had ever been. The face that had found its way into his mind on the hard nights the way certain things do when you have been away from them long enough that the missing becomes a kind of compass. He had watched her for 45 minutes from backstage and had not moved, and the crew members who were standing with him had not spoken because they understood without being told that this man was doing something important. He was memorizing her, just in case he ever needed to be away again. He was filling himself back up, and now he was right behind her. Deborah took one step, then another. And then she stopped stepping and started running, a 61-year-old woman in heels on a television set, running across a stage, and Marcus opened his arms and she walked into them and he wrapped her up completely, both arms around her, and lifted her slightly off the ground the way children lift their parents when they have grown bigger than them and the parent becomes, for just a moment, the smaller one. She said his name, just his name, over and over. "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." He said into her hair with his eyes closed, "I'm home, Mom, I'm home." The audience was on its feet, every single person standing. The applause was loud, but underneath it, if you listened, you could hear people crying, not quietly, but openly, without embarrassment, the way people cry in public when they have forgot to keep themselves composed because something real has happened in front of them. Steve Harvey was standing to the side of the stage. He was not hosting. He was watching. His arms were crossed over his chest. His head was down, and he stayed that way for a long time while the embrace happened. He did not try to redirect the moment or wrap it up or move it along. He just let it be what it was. Later, in an interview, he described that moment as one of the few times in his career when he fully forgot that he was on television. He said he was just a person standing in a room watching something sacred, and everything else fell away. When Marcus and Deborah finally separated, it was only by a few inches. She kept her hands on his face, both palms on his cheeks, and looked at him the way mothers look at their children when they are checking that every part is still there, still whole, still real. He let her look. He stayed very still and let her do whatever she needed to do, the patience of a man who understood exactly what 14 years of this woman's prayers had felt like, and was not about to rush her through the first moment she had been allowed to stop praying. She said, "You got old." The audience laughed, and Marcus laughed, and Steve Harvey laughed from the side of the stage. A genuine, unguarded laugh, and the laughter mixed with the tears the way it always does when something has been wound too tight for too long and finally releases. Marcus said, "Mom, you haven't changed at all." She said, "Boy, don't lie to me on national television." The audience laughed again. And in that moment, that small, ordinary, loving exchange between a mother and her son, something settled. The enormity of 14 years and a military career and overseas rotations and 9-day visits and prayers said every night like breathing, all of it became, for just a moment, simple. Two people, a mother and her son, in the same room. Steve walked over and shook Marcus's hand, then pulled him into the kind of embrace that men share when words aren't sufficient. He looked at him and said, "Staff Sergeant, thank you. Not just for your service, though that deserves everything, but for the way you came home, for giving her this." Marcus nodded. He said, "She gave me everything, man. This is the least I could do." Steve turned to the audience and to the cameras. He said, "You know, I get asked sometimes what this show is really about. People assume it's about the game, the surveys, the money, and those things are real and they matter. But moments like this one, this is what it's really about. It's about families. It's about what people carry for each other. It's about a woman who worked 22 years feeding other people's children because her own child was far away serving this country, and who never once stopped being proud even when it cost her something to be proud. That is the American story. That is the real one." The audience gave Deborah Calloway and Marcus Calloway a standing ovation that lasted so long the producers let it run without cutting. In the days and weeks after the episode aired, the clip of Deborah turning around of that exact moment became one of the most shared videos on the internet for 2 weeks straight. It was shared by veterans organizations and military family support groups. It was shared by mothers and sons who had been estranged for reasons that had nothing to do with military service. It was shared by people who had lost someone and found in the clip a kind of substitute comfort, a reminder that sometimes the person does come home. It was shared by strangers who tagged other strangers, who tagged other strangers, each one saying some version of, "You need to see this. Just watch." The comments section became something unusual, a space where thousands of people quietly deposited their own versions of the story. People wrote about deployments that had stretched on past what anyone expected, about homecomings that had gone beautifully and homecomings that had been complicated and hard, about the parents who had waited and the children who had come back different, and the long, careful work of finding each other again in the aftermath of long absence. The clip seemed to give people permission to talk about things they had been holding quietly for a long time, in the way that certain honest moments on screen sometimes do, by showing the feeling so clearly that everyone who has carried something similar suddenly feels safe enough to say so. A Gold Star mother wrote that she had watched the clip and wept, not from grief but from something more complicated, a gladness for Deborah that coexisted with her own loss, and a pride in recognizing the same love in Deborah's face that she had felt herself. She wrote, "I know that face. I wore that face for years. The difference between us is the ending, and I am glad her ending is this one." One veteran wrote online that he had watched the clip 7 times and cried every time, and that it made him call his mother immediately after the 7th viewing, and that she had picked up on the first ring and said his name in the exact same way that Deborah said Marcus's, and that he had not realized until that moment how much he had needed to hear it. A military spouse wrote that her husband had been deployed for 11 months and that she had been struggling. She said watching the clip reminded her that the waiting has an end, that there is a moment on the other side of all of it when someone turns around. She said she watched it on the hard nights when the waiting felt too large, and it helped. A teacher wrote that she had shown the clip to her high school class, juniors and seniors, 16 and 17 years old, the age where nothing is supposed to make you feel anything, and that the room had gone completely silent, and that afterward one of her students, a boy who never talked about his feelings about anything, had raised his hand and said, "My dad is deployed. I haven't seen him in 8 months." And the class had just been with him in that. No jokes, no performance. Just 15 teenagers being present for one of their own, because a 61-year-old woman turning around on a game show stage had quietly shown them what it looked like to let something matter. These are the ripples. Marcus stayed home for 3 weeks before his official transition processing was complete. During that time, he and Deborah made up for lost ground in the way that families do, not dramatically, not in a single conversation, but in accumulation. In breakfasts where nobody was in a hurry, in evenings watching television on the couch, in Marcus learning that his mother had developed a passion for gardening while he was gone, and now had a backyard full of tomatoes and peppers and herbs she could not stop naming. In Deborah learning that Marcus had become a genuinely good cook during his deployments, that necessity had turned into skill, and that he made a lamb stew that she ate 2 bowls of and then asked him to write down the recipe. In small recoveries of ordinary life, one day at a time, he fixed things around her house that had been broken and half fixed and broken again during his absence. A door hinge that had been sticking for 2 years, a kitchen faucet that dripped, a back porch step that had been soft for longer than she could remember and that she had learned to step over out of habit. He found each thing and fixed it quietly, without making it a production, because he understood that this was also a form of love, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just shows up with a screwdriver and gets to work. Deborah watched him do it from the kitchen window one afternoon, this tall man in a T-shirt on her back porch replacing a step she had been stepping over for years, and she cried silently into her coffee mug because she did not want him to see, and because she was so full of gratitude that she had nowhere else to put it. His sister, whose wedding he had attended on that 9-day leave 2 years earlier, came over for dinner in his second week home. The 4 of them sat around Deborah's kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had done his homework as a teenager, where Deborah had sat to write him letters during his first deployment, where the family had gathered after his father passed away years before Marcus enlisted, and they ate and talked and were, for the first time in a long time, whole. Deborah said later that the thing that surprised her most about having Marcus home was not the joy of it, though the joy was enormous. It was the silence. The specific, comfortable, unhurried silence of a house that had someone in it again. She said that for 14 years her house had been full of noise that she made on purpose, the television on in the background, the radio in the kitchen, because she had learned that if the house got too quiet, the missing got too loud. And now the silence was okay. Now the silence felt full instead of empty. She could sit in her kitchen in the morning without the radio on and just drink her coffee and listen to nothing, and it was enough. It was more than enough. She said, "I didn't realize how loud the missing was until it stopped." Marcus officially retired from active service the following spring. He moved back to his hometown, back to within 20 minutes of his mother's house, and began work with a veterans transition program, helping other service members navigate the often disorienting process of returning to civilian life. He was good at it. He understood, from the inside, the particular strangeness of coming home after long deployment, the way the world keeps moving while you are away and returns to you subtly but permanently different, the way your own family has grown and changed in your absence, the way you have grown and changed too, and the work of fitting all those changed pieces back together into something that holds. He also understood something that is not often talked about openly in military circles, the guilt that can come with homecoming. The specific guilt of a person who has been away for long stretches, who has missed birthdays and funerals and weddings and ordinary Tuesday evenings, and who comes home to find that life continued without them, efficiently and lovingly and completely, and must reckon with what that means. He talked about it in his work with veterans openly and without shame. He said, "Your family loving you enough to keep going is not a rejection. It's a tribute. It means they believed you were coming back. It means they were building something to come back to. Don't let the guilt take the homecoming from you. You earned the homecoming." The veterans he worked with responded to him the way people respond to someone who speaks from experience rather than from a textbook, with the particular openness that comes when you recognize that the person in front of you has been where you are. In interviews he gave about his work, he talked often about his mother. He talked about the letters she had written during his first deployment, actual handwritten letters on paper, one every 2 weeks without fail, and how he had kept every single one of them. How he had read them in the field in places he could not name and felt in the reading like he could find his way back to her kitchen table from anywhere in the world. He said, "She wrote me home every 2 weeks for 14 years. I always knew where home was because she kept telling me." He was asked once what he would say to other families going through long-term separation, to the mothers and fathers and spouses and children who were doing the waiting that his mother had done. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Tell them what's true. Tell them you're coming home. Tell them every time you talk, not because you can promise the specifics, nobody can promise the specifics, but because the direction of your heart matters. My mother needed to know I was coming back. She needed to know that everything I was doing in a direction that led back to her kitchen table. So tell them that. Tell them what direction you're going. That's what gets you both through." Deborah was asked the same question, what she would say to other military families, to other mothers doing the long wait. She answered immediately without hesitation in the way she answered everything. Write the letters, make the calls when you can. Be proud out loud where they can hear it, and pray, pray every night, not because it always works out the way you want, Lord knows I know that, but because the praying keeps you connected to them even when there's nothing else. You put their name out into the world every night and it keeps the thread from breaking. She paused. Then she smiled, the full smile, the one without the tiredness behind it. And when they come home, she said, let them see your face, don't try to hold it together. Just let them see your face. That is the whole lesson. You don't have to hold it together. You don't have to be composed or dignified or careful with your feelings. When the door opens, when the person turns around, when the words "I'm right behind you" finally arrive after 14 years of prayers said like breathing, you just turn around. And you let your face show everything that it shows. And you run, even in heels on a television stage, because some distances are too large to close by walking. Deborah Calloway ran. Marcus Calloway caught her. And 14 years of a mother's love came home. If this story moved you today, if it reminded you to call someone, to write the letter, to say the thing you've been meaning to say, to be proud out loud where someone can hear it, do that. Don't wait. The thread is still there. Pull it. And if you want to keep getting stories like this one, stories about real people who waited and loved and held on and got the moment they prayed for, hit that like button and subscribe. Every week we find another one because they are out there. They are happening all the time, in kitchens and airports and game show studios and hospital rooms and front porches. Love is always finding its way home. We'll see you in the next one.